Welcome back, everyone. So, if you've been watching this channel lately, or the last few video uploads, I've been discussing a few subjects here. Today, I want to give you guys another connection. Actually, some of you have mentioned this in the comments in the past few videos. Now, if you keep in mind the information that I discuss in those videos, then this will make a bit more sense. Now, folks, in one of my latest videos titled, "This is Shocking But Real," I mentioned that there was this plan for conflicts with 7 countries in the Middle East, starting with Iraq and ending with Iran as we move into this age of disclosure. So, just to refresh your memory, the United States war with Iraq, there were 2 major conflicts. The Gulf War from 1990 to 1991, and the Iraq War from 2003 to 2011. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait in August 1990, claiming it was historically part of Iraq and accused Kuwait of overproducing oil. The invasion alarmed the US and its allies, and so a coalition of 34 nations, led by the US, launched Operation Desert Shield and then Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Then, fast forward, following the September 11th, 2001 attacks, the US, under George W. Bush, had concerns that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, which could be nuclear, chemical, or biological. They never specified what type, right? Okay, so the UN inspections found no active WMD stockpiles, but the US and UK wanted military action anyway. So the US, along with coalition forces from the UK and Australia, invaded Iraq in 2003. This was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now, the reason I bring this up is because as all this was happening, something else was happening at the same time. An archaeologist was actively surveying land in Iraq, looking for something. Here's an abstract of the report that was published. Magnetometry in Uruk, Iraq, the city of King Gilgamesh. Uruk is one of the most famous sites for the early cultural development at Mesopotamia. The Sumerian city-state was also important for the origin of writing, and Uruk was the scene of action of man's oldest epic, the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. During the time of the Sassanids, 400 AD, the city was given up completely. Today, the ruin is dominated by shallow hills and wadis, covered by pottery, mud bricks, and slags. The area is totally free of modern buildings and far away from the modern village of Warka. Therefore, it is an ideal place for uncompensated cesium magnetometry. The most sensational find was the discovery of a canal system inside the city. Furthermore, the magnetogram shows the remains of buildings of the Babylonian type, as well as garden structures, a Middle Babylonian graveyard, and the so-called New Year's temple of the god Anu or goddess Ishtar. The city wall, which we prospected in a length of more than 1 kilometer, includes a water gate and is nearly 40 meters broad. From magnetometry, it is evident that it was built by burned mud bricks as it was described by the epic. In the west of the New Year's temple, in the middle of the former Euphrates River, we detected the remains of a building which may be interpreted as a burial. But if this building is the grave of the famous King Gilgamesh, as it was described by the Epic of Gilgamesh, it must remain speculative. And this was published April 2003. So, what happened with that discovery, folks? take a guess. So, in the spring of 2003, German archaeologist Uruk W.E. Fassbinder was part of a team surveying the ancient site of Uruk in what is now southern Iraq, using modern magnetometry to peer into the ground without digging. Uruk is one of the oldest cities in human history, and it is the setting for the Epic of Gilgamesh. That includes a passage about Gilgamesh's burial beneath the Euphrates River. By studying differences in the magnetic signature of the soil, Fassbinder and his colleagues were able to create detailed maps showing buried structures and features across the site, including canal systems and building foundations that matched descriptions from ancient texts. Now, in April 2003, he spoke to the international press and for programs like the BBC World Service about what they had found near the dry bed of the Euphrates. He reported that magnetometer scans had revealed the remains of a building in the former river course that could be interpreted as a burial, and he noted that its location and form looked very similar to that described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He didn't outright claim that this was the tomb of Gilgamesh, but he said it was a possibility worth further investigation. He explained that the technology he was using let archaeologists see buried mud brick walls and other features in detail. Fassbinder also described how his team had mapped garden plots, houses, and a canal network. But this was never followed by an excavation of the tomb structure. And with the outbreak of the Iraq War, just weeks later, the region became unstable and further fieldwork was postponed. No confirmed excavation or discovery of Gilgamesh's tomb has been published since then. And Fassbinder himself later pointed out that the media coverage had exaggerated the data when they weren't able to prove what they found. Now, folks, once the outbreak of the war occurred, there was a breakdown of civil authority, and that affected archaeology in ancient sites. So archaeologists had to stop what they were doing for the most part. Also, when conflicts like this begin, you of course have people looting all over. And because Fassbinder was afraid of the site being looted, he left it as is. Nothing was dug up, right? One thing to understand about this is that there are documented cases of military occupation and damage to major archaeological sites during and after the conflict. For example, the U.S. and other forces established camps and bases on parts of the ancient site of Babylon, with construction of helipads, parking areas, infrastructure that was cutting through some of these sites, causing irreversible damage. Now, I want to mention something here. Back then, there were some internet posts, especially on forums and message boards, about locals saying that military vehicles and trucks arrived at Uruk at night after the invasion started. And according to these accounts, the trucks that they had were loaded with boxes or artifacts and driven off, with soldiers or contractors guarding the area. There are posts also claiming that the US or coalition troops were seen digging, driving heavy equipment, or otherwise disturbing excavation areas at night, and that locals were told to stay away or that the site was secured for military use. So there's that story, okay? But something else happened during the war. The Uruk National Museum was the main repository of Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian artifacts in Baghdad. Now, before the U.S. invaded, cultural heritage experts, including museum staff and international organizations like UNESCO, warned the Pentagon and coalition planners that Uruk's museums and archaeological sites were at risk. They specifically flagged the Uruk National Museum as housing irreplaceable Sumerian and Mesopotamian artifacts, okay? Now, when Baghdad fell in April 2003, the US and Allied forces were focused on military operations and city control. Some reports indicate that a small group of US soldiers was stationed near the museum. Eyewitnesses described looters entering the museum through unsecured doors and windows within hours, suggesting that the guarding force was minimal. It was either poorly coordinated or just unaware of the threat. Witnesses and museum staff reported that armed men and crowds went through the exhibits, targeting high-value items like Sumerian statues, jewelry, cuneiform tablets. Some of the looting involved trucks carrying away crates or artifacts, but the identity of the looters remains unclear. Now, going back to what I talked about before, about planned conflicts starting with Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then Iran, what we may see in the near future are governments disclosing ancient artifacts and relics that are going to shift people's worldviews. Probably part of this age of disclosure, because they have things they are going to try and show us to change our thinking about history and the world we live in. Now, if Gilgamesh or Nimrod was a descendant of the Nephilim and also a giant, that would mean that his spirit would have been disembodied and he would be around here somewhere existing as an evil spirit or demon. Which means if they were able to obtain the DNA from his fleshly body, they could possibly rebuild his body so that it could be possessed by his spirit. Does that make sense? In that case, we would have the return of Gilgamesh. So, this should make you think about something. From Iraq and all these other places and Iran, whenever US soldiers or Allied forces went in on ground missions, how often were they on missions related to war, and how often were they on missions to find something? Artifacts and relics to add to their collection. Now, folks, here's another connection that some of you may have heard of. Whether it's true or not, that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. Now, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is this story. After the death of his friend, Enkidu, Gilgamesh becomes afraid of his own mortality and decides to find Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood, or who we know to be Noah. Okay? So his quest takes him far from Uruk, across dangerous mountains, deserts, and rivers, and eventually he reaches the twin peaks of Mount Mashu, which was guarded by scorpion men, part human, part scorpion. And they stood watch at the entrance to the land where the sun rises, which was the threshold to the world of Utnapishtim. In order for him to enter, Gilgamesh had to pass through a tunnel that stretches for 6 leagues of darkness, according to the text. The tunnel is described as a passage of terrifying shadows, but it ultimately leads him to the other side, where the light of the sun shines and the waters of life flow. Once through, he encounters Utnapishtim, who challenges him with tests and tells him the secrets of mortality and the flood. Now, some people believe that what's being described here is a Stargate. And some people, such as Dan Burish, who worked at Area 51, also believe that this Stargate was uncovered in Iraq way back in the 1920s, and that the Iraq War was a cover-up so that they could find it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it right there for now so that you can think about all this. Please, folks, click the thumbs up button for me to like this video. And I would like to know what you guys think about all this in the comments below. Everyone have a great day. And until next time, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon. Since the dawn of time, shadows have followed us. Questions without answers. Legends without end. Whispers speak of worlds hidden from sight. Truths buried in myth, carved in stone, and locked away in secret text and hidden vaults. Across every culture, every age, fragments remain. Clues to something vast, something forbidden, something waiting. This is Legends Mystery Masterclass. Here, we walk beyond the veil of ordinary understanding into ancient enigmas, forgotten corridors, and the secrets humanity was never meant to uncover. Prepare yourself. The mystery begins now.